If you're reading this, it means I broke the last rule. And if you ever find yourself working the night shift at the gas station on mile 23, remember, never, ever look in the freezer after 3:13 a.m. I know how that sounds like the setup to a bad joke, or one of those urban legends people swap on forums when they're bored and a little too caffeinated. But I'm not joking, and I'm definitely not bored. I'm writing this with hands that won't stop shaking, in a break room that smells like burnt coffee and old cigarettes, while someone keeps tapping on the glass just out of sight. I used to think this job was just a job, a paycheck, a place to kill time while I figured out what to do with my life. I'd mop the floors, restock the shelves, and ring up the occasional trucker or insomniac local. I'd laugh at the weird rules taped behind the counter, the ones everyone said were just a prank left by the last guy who worked here. But the thing about mile 23 is, the rules aren't a joke. They're the only thing keeping you alive when the snow starts falling and the world outside goes silent. Tonight, I broke the last rule. I told myself it was nothing, that the scratching from inside the freezer was just a busted fan or a trapped raccoon. But when I opened that door, when I looked inside, I saw something I can't unsee. Something that's still in there, waiting for me to slip up again. There are things I can't explain, but you need to know before it's too late. Not everyone who works the night shift here makes it to sunrise. Some just disappear. Others leave behind stories that sound too strange to be true until you're the one living them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. I never planned on ending up in Alaska, let alone working the graveyard shift at a gas station so far off the map that even Google gives up. But life has a way of shoving you into places you never meant to go. And for me, that place was mile 23. The sign out front is half buried in snow most of the year, the paint peeling, the numbers barely legible. If you blink, you'll miss it. Most people do. The station itself is a squat, ugly building squatting on the edge of a two-lane highway that stretches into nothing. On a clear day, you can see the mountains in the distance, their peaks like broken teeth against the sky. Most days aren't clear. The wind howls, the snow piles up, and the world shrinks to the circle of light cast by the flickering neon open sign. It's the kind of place where time seems to slow down, where the hours bleed together until you're not sure if it's midnight or noon. My name's Evan, by the way. I'm 24, and I took this job because it was the only one hiring. The ad said, night attendant needed, no experience necessary. I figured I could handle a little boredom. I didn't realize boredom would be the least of my problems. The first thing you notice about mile 23 is the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating kind that presses in on you from all sides. Even the radio only picks up static most nights. The only sounds are the hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional rattle of the heater, and the crunch of tires on gravel when a car pulls in. Sometimes, when the wind dies down, you can hear things moving out in the dark, branches scraping against the siding, maybe, or something else. My first shift, the day manager, Carl, gave me the tour. He was a big guy with a beard like a snowdrift and eyes that never quite met mine. He showed me how to work the register, where to find the mop, and which snacks were close to expiring. "You'll get used to the quiet," he said, handing me a battered set of keys. "And the rules. Don't forget the rules." I laughed, thinking he was messing with me. "What rules?" "Like, don't steal the jerky." He didn't smile. "You'll see. Just follow them. It's easier that way." The first few nights were uneventful, if you don't count the boredom. I'd sweep the floor, wipe down the coffee machine, and stare out at the endless dark. Sometimes a trucker would come in, eyes red from the road, and buy a pack of smokes or a cup of sludge-thick coffee. Sometimes a local would stop by, bundled up so tight you could barely see their face, and pay for gas in crumpled bills. They never stayed long. No one ever did. But even in the monotony, there were things that didn't add up. The way the lights would flicker at exactly 2:17 a.m. The freezer door that never quite closed, no matter how hard you slammed it. The payphone out front that rang, even though it wasn't connected to anything. I told myself it was just the building settling, or the wind, or my imagination running wild. I thought the rules were just a joke. I was wrong. The rules were taped behind the counter, yellowed and torn. The rules were taped behind the counter, yellowed and torn. The ink faded in places and smeared in others. At first, I barely glanced at them, assuming they were the usual corporate nonsense: how to handle a robbery, what to do in case of a spill, that kind of thing. But when the boredom got too much, I found myself reading them, one by one, and realizing just how wrong I was. There were 12 rules in total, each one stranger than the last. The first few looked almost normal, if you squinted. 1. Lock the doors at 11:59 p.m. sharp. 2. Don't let anyone in after midnight, no matter what they say. 3. If the payphone rings after midnight, don't answer. That one made me snort. The payphone out front was a rusted relic, the cord cut years ago. Who was going to call a ghost? I kept reading, the list growing more bizarre with every line. 4. If a man in a blue parka asks for diesel, say you're out. 5. Don't look at the security monitors between 2 o'clock and 2:15 a.m. 6. If you hear scratching from the freezer, turn up the radio and ignore it. I paused at that one, glancing over my shoulder at the humming freezer. The idea of something scratching from inside was almost funny almost. I told myself it was just a prank, a way to mess with new hires. But the more I read, the less I laughed. 7. If you see headlights pull in but no one gets out, don't go outside. 8. If the coffee pot is full at 3 a.m., pour it out and make a new batch. 9. Don't talk to the woman in the red scarf. If she talks to you, don't answer. Some rules had stains I hoped were coffee. Others looked recently added, the handwriting different, the ink darker. Rule 10 was written in shaky block letters. 10. If you find a tooth on the floor, throw it in the trash and don't look for the rest. I ran my tongue over my own teeth, suddenly uneasy. Who writes something like that? I kept reading, my skin prickling. 11. If the radio plays static and a child's voice, unplug it. 12. Never, ever open the freezer after 3:13 a.m. That last one was underlined 3 times, the paper torn where someone had pressed too hard. I stared at it, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty building. I looked at the clock, 2:45 a.m. The freezer hummed quietly, the payphone outside silent and still. I shook my head, telling myself it was all a joke, a weird tradition passed down from one bored night clerk to the next. But the thing is, the rules didn't feel like a joke. They felt like a warning, like someone had written them in a hurry, desperate to get the words down before something happened. I wondered who had written them and what had happened to them. I thought about asking Carl, but he'd already left for the night, his truck taillights disappearing into the snow. I was alone, the only living soul for miles, with nothing but the hum of the lights and the list of rules for company. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in my throat. The rules were absurd, but the longer I stared at them, the more I felt like I was being watched. Like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd follow the instructions or break them. I laughed it off until the first rule was tested. My first real night alone at mile 23 started like any other. I clocked in at 10:45 p.m., the sky already black, the wind rattling the windows. I made a pot of coffee, wiped down the counter, and tried not to think about the rules taped behind me. The place was empty, just the way I liked it. I told myself I'd get through the night, collect my paycheck, and laugh about it in the morning. By midnight, the monotony had set in. I swept the floor, restocked the chips, and counted the candy bars for the 3rd time. The heater clicked and groaned, fighting a losing battle against the cold. I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for anything to happen. At 12:07 a.m., the payphone outside rang. I froze, broom in hand, staring through the smudged glass at the booth. The phone was ancient, the cord dangling uselessly. I remembered the rule. If the payphone rings after midnight, don't answer. My heart thudded in my chest. It rang again, shrill and insistent, echoing in the empty lot. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe Carl had rigged it to mess with me. I stepped closer to the window, peering out into the darkness. The phone rang a 3rd time, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the ringing. I waited, breath held, but nothing happened. No one appeared. The wind picked up, swirling snow across the lot. I tried to shake it off, but the unease lingered. I busied myself with the register, counting the till, when the lights flickered overhead. Once, twice, then steadied. I glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. The exact time the lights always flickered, according to the rules. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. At 2:30, a car pulled in. Headlights swept across the windows, blinding me for a moment. I squinted, watching as a figure stepped out, a man in a blue parka, hood pulled low. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots crunching on the ice. I remembered another rule. If a man in a blue parka asks for diesel, say you're out. He came inside, the bell above the door jangling. He didn't look at me, just wandered the aisles, hands buried in his pockets. I tried to act normal, ringing up a pack of gum for him when he finally approached the counter. Diesel? He asked, voice muffled by the hood. Sorry, we're out, I said, forcing a smile. He stared at me for a long moment, eyes shadowed. Then he nodded, dropped the gum on the counter, and left without another word. I watched him go, heart pounding. He didn't buy anything. He didn't even look back. I tried to laugh it off, but my nerves were shot. I poured myself a cup of coffee, only to find the pot was too full. I checked the clock. 3 a.m. Another rule. If the coffee pot is full at 3 a.m., pour it out and make a new batch. I hesitated, then dumped the coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl down the drain. I made a fresh pot, hands shaking. The rest of the night passed in a blur of small, unsettling moments. The radio crackled with static, then cut out completely. The freezer hummed louder than usual, a faint scratching sound coming from inside. I turned up the radio, just like the rules said, and tried not to listen. At 4:12, a woman in a red scarf appeared at the door, her face pale and expressionless. She didn't come in, just stood outside, staring at me through the glass. I remembered the rule. Don't talk to the woman in the red scarf. If she talks to you, don't answer. I looked away, pretending not to see her. When I glanced back, she was gone. By the time the sun started to rise, I was exhausted, nerves frayed. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was just tired, jumpy from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But when I stepped outside to clear the snow from the walkway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Footprints, leading away from the door, deep and clear in the fresh snow. But there were no footprints leading toward the door, only away, as if someone had been standing there all night, waiting for me to notice. I thought I was imagining things, until I saw the footprints in the snow leading away from the door. That was the moment I realized the rules weren't a joke. They were a warning, and I was in way over my head. I started keeping a journal, for my own sanity. After that first night, I started paying attention to the people who came and went at mile 23. There weren't many, but the ones who did show up seemed to fall into two categories, the regulars and the outsiders. The regulars were the ones who belonged, in their own strange way. The outsiders, well, they were something else entirely. There was Jerry, the morning guy, who'd been working at the station longer than anyone could remember. He was grizzled, with a face like weathered leather and a laugh that sounded like gravel in a blender. He'd show up at 6 a.m. sharp, every day, no matter the weather. The first time I tried to tell him about the rules, he just grinned, showing a mouthful of crooked teeth. You'll learn, he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee so thick it barely moved in the pot. Or you won't. Either way, you'll figure out what matters. He never asked about my nights, and I never asked about his. There was an unspoken agreement between us, a kind of camaraderie born from shared silence and mutual wariness. Sometimes, when the snow was especially bad, he'd offer me a ride home. I always said no. Something about the way he looked at the road made me think he saw things out there I didn't want to know about. Then there were the regular customers. Old Mrs. Halvorson, who came in every Thursday at 2 a.m. for a single can of cat food and a scratch ticket. She never spoke, just nodded and left exact change on the counter. Or the trucker with the faded baseball cap, who always bought 2 energy drinks and a pack of gum, never making eye contact. Some regulars never made eye contact. Some never left their cars, just sat in the lot with the engine running, staring at the building like they were waiting for something or someone to come out. But it was the outsiders who unsettled me the most. They didn't fit the pattern. Sometimes they'd show up on foot, no car in sight, their clothes too thin for the cold. Sometimes they'd ask strange questions, like what time the sun would rise, or if I'd seen a dog with 3 legs. Once, a woman came in and asked if she could use the bathroom. I pointed her down the hall, but she just stood there, staring at the freezer, lips moving silently. She left without buying anything, and when I checked the bathroom later, the mirror was fogged up, even though no one had used the sink. I started to notice things about the staff, too. There was a photo on the break room wall, a group shot from a Christmas party years ago. I recognized Jerry, a few of the other faces, but there were two people I'd never seen before, a young woman with bright red hair and a guy with a tattoo on his neck. When I asked Jerry about them, he just shrugged. "People come and go," he said. "Some folks don't last long. Some folks, well, they just stop showing up." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. But I started to wonder about the people who'd worked here before me. The ones who'd written the rules, or added new ones in shaky handwriting. The ones who'd left without saying goodbye. The camaraderie with Jerry and the regulars was a thin shield against the isolation that crept in during the long, empty hours. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to the coffee machine, just to hear a voice. Other times, I'd watch the security monitors, hoping for a glimpse of something normal, a fox, maybe, or a snowplow. But the screens always seemed to flicker at the wrong moments, showing shadows where there shouldn't be any. I learned to keep my head down, to follow the rules, to nod at the regulars and ignore the outsiders. It was a lonely existence, but it was better than the alternative. But the worst was the night the rules changed. I came in for my shift, and the list was different. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe the boredom was finally getting to me. But as I hung up my coat and poured myself a cup of coffee, I glanced at the rules and felt my stomach drop. Rule number 7 was gone. The one about the headlights and not going outside if no one got out of the car. In its place, written in a hurried scrawl, was a new rule. Don't trust the reflection in the window after 2 a.m. I stared at it, heart pounding. The rest of the list looked the same, but the new rule was wedged in like it had always been there. I ran my finger over the paper, feeling the fresh indentations from the pen. The ink was still a little wet. I tried to remember if Jerry had mentioned anything about changing the rules, but he hadn't. He'd just grunted his usual greeting and disappeared into the snow, leaving me alone with the humming lights and the endless dark. I checked the clock, 1:58 a.m. 2 minutes until the new rule would matter. I tried to distract myself with busy work, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows. The glass was black, reflecting the inside of the station like a mirror. I could see myself moving behind the counter, every gesture doubled and reversed. I told myself it was nothing, just a weird prank, maybe a test to see if I was paying attention. But as the clock ticked over to 2 a.m., the air in the station seemed to change. The lights flickered, and for a split second, my reflection didn't move with me. I froze, staring at the glass. My own face stared back, but the eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep, like looking into a well with no bottom. I blinked, and everything snapped back to normal. My reflection moved when I did. The same tired eyes, the same rumpled uniform. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off, but the sound died in my throat. I needed answers. When Jerry came in for his morning shift, I cornered him by the coffee machine. "Did you change the rules?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me for a long moment, then sipped his coffee. "You saw it too," he said quietly. That was all he'd say. He wouldn't meet my eyes after that, just busied himself with the register and muttered about inventory. I pressed him, but he just shook his head. "Sometimes the rules change," he said. "Sometimes they have to." I started to notice other things, too. The regulars seemed more on edge, glancing at the windows as they came in, keeping their heads down. Mrs. Halvorson didn't show up for her usual can of cat food. The trucker in the baseball cap sat in his cab for nearly an hour, staring at his own reflection in the rearview mirror before finally driving off without coming inside. The outsiders were worse. One night, a man in a suit came in, his face pale and drawn. He walked straight to the window, pressed his hand against the glass, and whispered something I couldn't hear. When I asked if he needed help, he just smiled, a wide, empty smile that didn't reach his eyes, and left without buying anything. The paranoia started to eat at me. I covered the windows with cardboard, but the reflection still found me in the shiny surfaces, the coffee pot, the freezer door, the chrome on the napkin dispenser. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, only to turn and see nothing but my own face, staring back with a look I didn't recognize. I started to wonder if the rules were alive, adapting to whatever was out there. Maybe they were trying to protect us, or maybe they were just keeping the balance. Either way, I realized I couldn't trust anything, not the rules, not the reflections, not even my own senses. I wrote the new rule in my journal, underlining it 3 times. I didn't know what would happen if I broke it, and I didn't want to find out. That's when I started seeing things in the glass. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes the world feel brittle. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the station felt even more isolated than usual. I was halfway through my shift, counting down the hours until sunrise, when the radio crackled to life. "Evan, you there?" It was Marcy, the part-timer who covered weekends and the occasional graveyard when Jerry needed a break. Her voice was thin, shaky, barely audible over the static. "Yeah, I'm here," I replied, pressing the button on the battered walkie we used when the landline went down. "What's up?" I'm outside. My car died. I'm at the edge of the lot. Can you come get me?" I glanced at the clock. 2:11 a.m. My stomach twisted. The new rule, "Don't trust the reflection in the window after 2 a.m. echoed in my mind, but so did another. If you see headlights pull in but no one gets out, don't go outside." I looked out the window, heart pounding. Sure enough, Marcy's little sedan was parked at the far end of the lot, headlights on, engine steaming in the cold. But I couldn't see her inside. "Marcy, stay in your car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll call Jerry, get him to." "Please, Evan," she interrupted, her voice cracking. "Something's out here. I can see it in the glass. Please, just..." The radio cut out, replaced by a burst of static and then silence. I stared at the walkie, my hands shaking. I knew what the rules said. I knew what I was supposed to do, but I couldn't just leave her out there. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and stepped outside, the cold biting through my jacket. The snow crunched under my boots, the wind whipping around me. The station's lights cast long, distorted shadows across the lot. I kept my eyes down, avoiding the windows, focusing on the beam of my flashlight. "Marcy," I called, my breath fogging in the air. No answer. I moved closer to her car, the headlights blinding me for a moment. I shielded my eyes, peering inside. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger door hung open, swinging in the wind. I felt a surge of panic. I turned, scanning the lot, and that's when I saw her standing by the edge of the woods, her back to me, hair whipping in the wind. She looked small, fragile, lost. "Marcy," I shouted, running toward her. She didn't turn. As I got closer, I realized something was wrong. Her reflection shimmered in the glass of the car window, but it wasn't moving right. It lagged behind, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror. I stopped short, heart hammering. The air felt thick, electric. The world seemed to tilt, the snow swirling in impossible patterns. I looked back at the station, its windows glowing like eyes in the dark. For a moment, I saw my own reflection in the glass, except it wasn't me. It was grinning, teeth too sharp, eyes too black. I forced myself to look away, focusing on Marcy. I reached out, grabbing her shoulder. She spun around, her face pale and twisted with fear. "Don't look at the glass," she whispered. "It's not us. It's not." A shadow moved behind her, tall and thin, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It reached for her, fingers stretching, nails scraping the air. I yanked Marcy back, stumbling toward the station. The shadow followed, gliding over the snow, its face a shifting blur of features. We ran, slipping and sliding, the cold burning our lungs. I fumbled with the keys, shoving Marcy inside and slamming the door behind us. The shadow pressed against the glass, its face flattening, eyes searching. The lights flickered, the radio blared static, and the freezer began to hum, louder and louder. I grabbed the walkie, desperate. Jerry, are you there? Something's out here. It's at the window. Static." Then, faintly, Jerry's voice. "Don't look at it. Don't let it in. Whatever you do, don't break the glass." The shadow pounded on the window, cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. Marcy sobbed, covering her ears. I backed away, heart racing, as the shadow's face pressed closer, its mouth opening wide, wider, until it was nothing but darkness. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The lights steadied. The radio went silent. The shadow vanished, leaving only a smear of frost on the glass. Marcy and I sat on the floor, gasping for breath. I looked at the rules, my eyes drawn to the new one about the reflection. I'd broken it. I'd gone outside, looked at the glass, let the thing get close. I saw what happens when you break the rules. I wish I could forget. Marcy quit the next day. She didn't say goodbye, just left her uniform in a crumpled heap in the break room. Jerry didn't ask any questions. He just looked at me, eyes tired, and poured another cup of coffee. After that night, I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. After that night, sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my mind. The shadow at the window, Marcy's terrified whisper, the way the rules seemed to change, as if the station itself was alive and watching. I started to wonder if I was losing my grip, if the endless dark and the isolation were finally getting to me. But the more I dug, the more I realized I wasn't the first to feel this way. Not by a long shot. It started with a box I found in the back room, buried under a pile of old uniforms and broken "no smoking" signs. Inside were stacks of yellowed newspaper clippings, faded Polaroids, and a battered notebook with a cracked leather cover. The first clipping was dated 1978. Local teen missing after night shift at mile 23 gas. The photo showed a smiling kid in a red jacket, standing in front of the same grimy windows I stared through every night. There were more. Mile 23 employee disappears, foul play suspected. Family demands answers after daughter vanishes. The stories were always the same. Someone working the night shift, someone who didn't come home. Sometimes there were details that made my skin crawl, a mention of strange lights, a witness who claimed to see shadows moving in the snow, a sheriff's deputy who quit the force and left town without a word. The notebook was worse. It was filled with cramped handwriting, page after page of rules, some I recognized, others that had never made it to the list behind the counter. Don't whistle after midnight. Never sweep the floor facing the freezer. If you hear your own voice calling from outside, don't answer. Some rules were crossed out, others underlined, as if someone had been desperately trying to keep up with something that wouldn't stop changing. I started asking questions, quietly, carefully. Most people in town didn't want to talk about mile 23. They'd shrug, change the subject, or give me that look, the one that said I was better off not knowing. But a few old-timers would talk, if you caught them in the right mood, after enough whiskey, or on a night when the wind was howling just right. There's always been something wrong with that place, one old man told me, his eyes fixed on the fire. Even before the station was built. The ground's not right. Things don't stay buried out there. A woman at the diner leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. My brother worked there, back in the 80s. He lasted 3 weeks. Came home one morning, white as a sheet, wouldn't say a word. Packed up and left the next day. Never saw him again. I pieced together what I could. The land the station sat on had a history, old stories about disappearances, strange lights, animals found frozen solid in the middle of summer. Some said it was cursed, others blamed the cold, the isolation, the endless dark. But the more I learned, the more I started to believe the rules weren't just for us. They were for whatever was out there, too. If you've heard the story about the mile 23 station, you know how it ends. Or you think you do. Maybe you've read the posts online, the ones that get deleted after a few hours, or heard the rumors whispered in truck stops and bars. Maybe you think it's just another ghost story, a way to scare new hires or pass the time on a long, lonely night. But I've seen the evidence. I've read the names, the dates, the desperate notes left behind by people who vanished without a trace. I've seen the way the rules change, adapting to new threats, new dangers. I've felt the cold seep up from the floor, the way the shadows move when you're not looking, the way the glass sometimes shows things that aren't there. There are things buried in the permafrost that should never thaw. Things that remember. Things that wait. The rules are a barrier, a thin line between our world and something older, hungrier, and infinitely patient. Every time someone breaks a rule, that line gets a little thinner. Every time someone disappears, the rules get a little longer, a little stranger. I started to wonder if the station was a trap, or a prison, or maybe just a warning. Maybe the rules are the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. Or maybe they're just a way to keep us busy, to distract us from the truth that we're not alone out here, and we never have been. The banality of it all is what gets to me. The way evil hides in plain sight, behind a counter, under fluorescent lights, in the hum of a freezer and the ring of a payphone. Ordinary place, extraordinary horror. That's the real secret of Mile 23. But the rules aren't just for us. They're for what's out there, too. It started with the lights. One by one, they flickered and died, plunging the station into a darkness so thick it felt alive. I fumbled for my flashlight, but the batteries were dead brand new, but dead all the same. The hum of the freezer grew louder, a deep, throbbing pulse that rattled the shelves and made the windows tremble in their frames. I checked the rules, desperate for guidance, but the list was different again. Some rules were missing, others rewritten in handwriting I didn't recognize. The last line was a smear of ink, as if someone had tried to write something and failed. I tried to follow the routine, clinging to the familiar. I locked the doors at 11:59, poured out the coffee at 3 o'clock, ignored the payphone when it rang and rang and rang. But the rules didn't seem to matter anymore. The payphone's shrill cry echoed inside my skull, even when I covered my ears. The freezer door rattled, the scratching inside growing frantic, desperate. Shadows moved in the corners, slipping between the aisles, always just out of sight. At 2 a.m., the windows began to fog, the glass warping and twisting until my own reflection stared back at me with a hungry, knowing smile. I backed away, heart pounding, and nearly tripped over a can of cat food rolling across the floor. The radio blared static, then a child's voice, singing a lullaby I'd never heard before. I yanked the plug from the wall, but the song kept playing, growing louder, more distorted. That's when the door opened. I hadn't heard anyone approach, no footsteps, no engine, nothing but the wind. But there he was, the trucker in the faded baseball cap, the one who never made eye contact, who always paid in exact change. He stepped inside, the bell above the door silent for the first time in my memory. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something ancient and cold in his eyes. "You know what's coming, don't you?" he said, his voice low and rough. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry, my tongue heavy. "What are you?" He smiled, and his teeth were too sharp, too many. "Just a regular. Like you, like all of us, once." The shadows pressed closer, swirling around him, flickering in the corners of my vision. The rules, I thought. I have to follow the rules. But the list was gone, the paper torn from the wall, shredded and scattered across the floor. "Why are you here?" I managed, backing toward the counter. He shrugged, the gesture oddly human. Someone has to keep the balance. Someone has to make sure the rules are followed. But tonight the rules are broken. The freezer door banged open, the cold spilling out in a wave that froze my breath in my lungs. Something crawled out long, thin, all elbows and knees, its face a blur of shifting features. It moved toward me, dragging itself across the tiles, leaving a trail of frost and blood. I grabbed the nearest thing, a broom, a can, anything, and hurled it at the creature. It barely flinched. The trucker watched, his eyes gleaming in the dark. "You can't fight it," he said. "You can only survive it. If you remember the last rule." "What's the last rule?" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. He tilted his head, considering. "The last rule is the one you never write down. The one you only learn when it's too late." The creature lunged, and I dove behind the counter, scrambling for the emergency flashlight. It flickered to life, the beam weak and sputtering, but enough to hold the thing at bay for a moment. I remembered the notebook, the crossed-out rules, the desperate scrawls. I remembered Jerry's tired eyes, Marcy's whispered warning, the old man at the fire. The rules were never about safety. They were about survival, about keeping the darkness just far enough away to make it to morning. The trucker stepped closer, his form shifting, flickering between human and something else. You have to choose, Evan. Stay and fight, or run and forget. But if you run, the rules will follow. They always do. The creature shrieked, a sound like ice cracking on a lake, and slammed into the counter. The glass shattered, shards flying everywhere. I covered my face, feeling the sting of cold and blood. The lights flickered one last time, then died for good. In the darkness, I heard the trucker's voice, soft and distant. "Remember the last rule, Evan. Remember." And then he was gone. The creature retreated, melting into the shadows, leaving me alone in the freezing dark. I realized too late the last rule was never written down. Now I'm sitting here, in the half-light of dawn, writing this as fast as I can. If you're reading, there's still time. Dawn came slow and gray, the kind of light that doesn't warm, just reveals. I sat behind the counter, shivering, blood drying on my hands. The station silent except for the low hum of the freezer. The creature was gone. The trucker was gone. The rules, at least the ones I'd known, were gone, too. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because when I opened my eyes, there was a new list taped to the wall. The paper was crisp, the ink fresh, the handwriting unfamiliar. 12 rules again, but none of them were the same. Some were even stranger than before. 1. If you hear someone knocking from inside the ice chest, do not answer. 2. The snowplow driver is not your friend. 3. If the lights turn blue, hide under the counter and count to 30. 4. Never let the same customer pay twice. 5. If you find a key on the floor, do not pick it up. 6. The coffee machine lies. 7. If you see a child outside after midnight, lock every door and do not look at their face. 8. The freezer must remain closed until sunrise. 9. If the radio plays your favorite song, unplug it and leave it outside. 10. Never sweep the floor after 4 a.m. 11. If you see your own car pull into the lot, do not approach. 12. The last rule is for you to discover. I read them over and over, trying to make sense of it all. My hands shook, but not from the cold. I thought about Jerry, about Marcy, about the faces in those old photographs. I wondered how many lists there had been before mine, how many more there would be after. If you ever find yourself at mile 23, remember, the rules are watching you, too. They change, they adapt, and they never really leave you alone. Maybe you think you'd do better, that you'd figure out the pattern, crack the code, survive where others failed. Maybe you're right. Or maybe you're just next. There are more rules. I just haven't learned them all yet. If you've made it this far, you know more than most. Maybe you've heard stories like this before about haunted roads, cursed jobs, places that eat people alive. Maybe you think it's all just a game, a story to scare you before bed. But if you're ever driving through Alaska and you see a lonely gas station with a flickering neon sign, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back. And if you do stop, if you find yourself standing behind the counter, reading a list of rules that makes your skin crawl, remember, the last rule is never written down. It's the one you only learn when it's too late. Leave your theories in the comments. Maybe together, we can figure out what the last rule really means. Or maybe we're not supposed to. The shift never really ends at mile 23. The rules just keep changing. And the next story? It might be yours.